record this one and see how we do and put the best one up for the online students. All right, now this is course lecture 12, and it's not the lecture we had planned for today. Let me escape out and make sure I share the screen properly. Here we are. All right. So once again, this was not the lecture that was planned, but nevertheless, history caught up to us over the weekend, without doubt. And so this lecture had to be put together in a hurry over the weekend because it's really one of major consequence. All right, now, here's the thing. We're 42 days out from the election. It's happening really soon. And the timing of the events of the weekend make the election all the more critical. We have a debate also coming up on next Tuesday. So I need to prepare you for that. We're going to take that on as a major assignment, right, Tuesday night. And hopefully you'll clear your schedules and you'll take in the debate. And so why I wanted to re-record this for the online students is I need you to clear the 29th, Tuesday, to pay attention to the debates. All right, now, debates can be tipping points. But as we've learned, there's also other tipping points that we need to look at. And we've just passed a grim milestone. This is sad stuff. The thing is, I'm always asked, when there's a big event like 9/11 or the war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Osama bin Laden is finally taken to justice, whether this is the biggest thing. And it's never been the biggest thing. I mean, the truth is, I tell my students, I've seen bigger stories. I've seen bigger issues. We've lived through more important events in my lifetime than the one right now. I can't say that now. As of this weekend, we passed the grim milestone of 200,000 Americans passing away from the coronavirus. There's no way to get around that number. That's a big number. And it's why we need to double down and wear our masks and socially distance, because we've got to prevent more people from passing, mainly older people, but people with conditions and so on. And this is important. Now, Vietnam was the biggest issue during my youth and the biggest issue in my lifetime, and the whole 1968 experience and everything else. And that was always bigger, right? Always seemed like a bigger deal. But this is now approaching 4 times more deadly than the Vietnam War over an 8-year period. And it's been in less than a year. So this is a grim number, but we can't avoid it. We have to look at this number straight in the face and then do what we can as individuals to help the country get through this difficult time. And then also this weekend was the passing of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She is a justice on the Supreme Court, and she has become a cultural icon. She is, quite frankly, she got this acronym based after the Notorious BIG. Somebody attached this to her, the Notorious RBG, because she has been probably the greatest legal mind in our history in recent times, maybe in the last half century. She is just an amazingly talented and gifted jurist. And when I say jurist, I mean member of the Supreme Court. Her life changed all of our lives. She is the one that argued all the difficult cases on equal rights, not just for women, but for men too, and for LGBTQ people, and for everybody down the list. And she has been amazing. And she was so well liked by every member of the court. So before we started to talk about her, which needs to be the focus of today, let's do what we have to do at the beginning of each class and talk about the polls and the lagging indicators. Remember, the polls reflect what happened a week ago. And in this case, we're going to look at a 10-day span. Look at Biden right now with 269. He dropped down from, maybe 40 electoral votes up until this moment right here. This is kind of the low point for him. Mr. Trump got down to about 111, and now he's come back up. Now let's look at 10 days. Did the book Rage, did the Atlantic article before the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, did that have an impact? Well, maybe it did. Let's take a look. Biden jumped up to 281. So let's go back to 269. Mr. Trump jumped up too, though, to 119. So it looks like people are starting to decide. In fact, they say 80% of voters have already made up their minds and there's no changing them. 11% said they're persuadable one way or the other, and the rest probably won't even vote. So it's going to be one of those elections really like no other. And also at stake, and I wasn't going to talk about this till next week after the debate, but is the Senate. The Senate only elects 1/3 of the Senate members every 2 years. So they serve for 6 years, but they're on a staggered schedule. And so 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. Now, if you were to ask anybody, me included, will the Republicans lose control of the Senate this election cycle? And the answer would be no. I mean, most of the people that were up for re-election were Republicans in strong Republican states. And guess what? That's all changed. The Democrats now, because of everything that's happened with the coronavirus, with the impeachment, with everything else, now has a chance to steal the Senate away. Now, listen, look at the implications for your research paper. If Mr. Trump wins even marginally, Republicans will keep control of the Senate, which gives him additional power going forward in the next 4 years. If Mr. Biden wins, chances are he will lift some of these seats over the top of the Democrats, and they could have, right now they have 48 members. They could have 52 members, or maybe even 53. And then it would fulfill that requirement of having the House and the Senate in your party's control for at least 2 years. So Biden would have a shot to be a great president according to that one criteria. So this is really important that we look at the Senate. Now, when it comes to replacing a Supreme Court justice, the Senate and the Supreme Court are tied together with the president in a way that's really, really important to know. Here's how it works. The president picks the candidates, nominates them for the Supreme Court when there's a vacancy. Mr. Trump, within 24 hours, said he had names and he was going to pick somebody by Friday. All right, and he said it's going to be a woman, right, to replace the legendary Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Well, here's the thing. That name will go to the Senate, and the Senate can decide whether they want to hear that now or not, or wait till after the election, or even wait until next year. But they will vote on that nomination, and that's who replaces the person on the Supreme Court if they get a 51 vote margin. Actually, right now, they just need 50 because Mike Pence could cast the deciding vote if there's a tie. The Supreme Court is powerful. They're able to block certain presidential orders. They're certainly able to look at some of the laws and say, hey, this law is unconstitutional. We need to change the law. So the Supreme Court is really, really important. And so you see the outcome of the Senate election is important for, as important, I think, as the presidential election in terms of shaping our history. All right, now let's get back to where we really should be focused on, and that is the passing of one of the greatest legal minds in American history, without any question, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or RBG. I don't know of any other Supreme Court justice that was honored with an acronym like LBJ, JFK, FDR. This is how special she was. Now, she was part of a court that was still pretty much male dominated, and she was part of a court. She was the second woman picked to be a woman on the Supreme Court. I'll show you a picture of the first one here in a second. And 2 others were appointed by President Barack Obama. Mr. Trump has appointed 2, this guy and this guy. So it's kind of important to know how important this election is in terms of shaping the Supreme Court. But the wonderfulness of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is that while she was very much a jurist from the left, a liberal icon, leader in the feminist movement before she became a member of the court, arguing 6 cases in front of the Supreme Court on mainly women's rights and equality for women. Her best friend on the court was one of the most conservative members of the court, more right-wing, Antonin Scalia. They were very, very close friends, and you'll hear her talk affectionately about him when she gave his eulogy. That's how close they were. The families even traveled together on vacation. That's how close they were. So very conservative, very, very liberal, but still could be friends and could argue the law instead of making things personal. And here's a picture of them riding an elephant together in India on a joint vacation. Well, let's get to Sandra Day O'Connor. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court. And when I was growing up, that was like such a big deal because there had never been a female member of the Supreme Court ever. There had never been but one, I think, Catholic, and never been a Jewish member of the court. And that's like, okay, so why? Well, because the country was very prejudiced at the time towards certain groups of people, and they couldn't get confirmed through the Senate. That's just the way it was. So it was basically a lot of white men, some 200 of them, that became the justices. So when Ronald Reagan appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, it was a big, big deal and a cool thing. Now, she was a great jurist herself. We also talked earlier about two women who have broken through a little bit by getting the nominations of their parties for the vice presidency. And we talked about Geraldine Ferraro and Sarah Palin. Now, we now know that Kamala Harris is only the third woman even nominated by a party for that vice presidency, but could win in this election and become the first female vice president, which would give her a track to become the first woman president in history. And so, yeah, let's not forget Nikki Haley too, who's a Republican person that could become the first female president. So this is historic times. You know, I always tell the students, I've been telling them for about 10 years, you live in historic times. You live in the most historic times of my lifetime, and I'm 66 years old. And yet we kind of pass through the days like these things aren't important, but boy, you look back and you realize how important they really are. And so our first ladies also had an impact. Jackie Kennedy, Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan, Barbara Bush, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Melania Trump, all had important roles in our country. But now we have one member of the Supreme Court that's a woman. Bill Clinton would pick the second one, and that would be a Jewish member of the court by the name of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so it was monumental on two fronts, right? Here is a president who had a list of candidates, like Mr. Trump has right now, a list of candidates, going through the list. And his wife, Hillary Clinton, came to him and said, you're missing somebody on that list. You need to interview this Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's on the DC circuit. And she'd been following her writings and whatever. So they snuck her into the White House late night on a Sunday because they didn't want the press to think that they'd made a decision or something like that. So they wanted to keep it hush hush for the time. And they sat down, and within 10 minutes, Bill Clinton said he made his decision. Now, he was a law professor, as was Hillary. They were both lawyers. And she was a professor of law as well before becoming a member of the court system. And they just said it was a master class in the law, the history of the courts, and all of that. And it was just like within 10 minutes, he changed his mind and pushed everybody else off the list and picked her. The greatest legal mind probably of the last 50 years. Now, President Obama picks two more women. The first Latino American, Sonia Sotomayor, she's Catholic. Now, by the way, I think at this point, we actually have 5 Catholic members of the court, maybe 4, and at least 3 Jewish members. Elena Kagan was also picked by Barack Obama, and she became the 8th Jewish member of the court. Now, the fun between Sotomayor and Kagan is that all 3 of these are from New York. Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan are all from New York City. But these two really share some fun, back and forth when it comes to one's a Yankees fan and the other's a Mets fan. And the reason I tell you that story is just to let you know that these people are just real human beings that we need to kind of consider as people too, not just these judges that sit on this big stage and with their black robes and make these very weighty decisions. Yes, they do that, but they're also warm people. And Ginsburg, for example, was a big fan of the opera, and she helped promote opera in New York and just get it in DC and just get it to a new level of appreciation. So there's those kinds of things. They have lives too. Well, the Notorious RBG started her career. She graduates first in her class at Columbia Law. She also was at Harvard for a while, and she was on that same, review, Harvard Law Review that Barack Obama was a part of. She graduates first in her class and couldn't get a job in a major law firm in New York. Why? Because she was a woman, and because she had children, and she was Jewish. She had 3 strikes against her. Now, here's the deal. She would then go on to become a professor, But then she argued cases for a group called the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union. Now, they take on civil rights cases. And I can give you an example of that. For example, she ruled on a law as a judge called the Lilly Ledbetter Law, which allows women to be paid equally in the workplace and can sue if they're not treated equally and when it comes to pay and compensation. But here's a good example, right? According to the law, you can't discriminate when you hire someone. So I won't tell you the company or whatever, but I was asked to come in and look at their hiring practices. And I was stunned. I was shocked because we had inexperienced, untrained people asking women candidates questions like, oh, are you married? Well, first of all, that's none of their business. But then, are you married? Oh, is your husband still in school? Oh, are you planning to have a family? And it sounds so innocent, but what they were doing was screening out women candidates because if they were likely to have children or if they were likely to get their husband through school and move, then they were disqualifying them because they wouldn't stay with the company perhaps as long as a man. That is, you cannot ask those questions under the law. Under the law, you have to only ask questions about the person's ability to do the job, not what their family plans are. That is just off limits. So we retrained all these people and said, wait a minute, if you've got a great woman candidate, hire that person. So what if she takes a year off to help start her family? When she comes back, she's going to be even a better employee, and you don't want to lose that talent. We're looking for the best talent. So don't discriminate. And the current company I work for, I'm so proud of, Qualtrics, has built a great, big, huge daycare center right next to the main campus here in Provo so that moms can drop their children off, and men too, because some of the men in our staff have this situation where they're helping to raise their children or maybe doing it alone. And they have a daycare right there next door that they can go to immediately if there's any issues at all. And it's a top flight daycare. That's the way we need to treat people and allow them all to perform their jobs to the best of their ability and not discriminate based on whether they want a family or not. And these are the kinds of cases that Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued. And she also argued cases on behalf of LGBTQ people and men too, because there are certain laws that the way they're written discriminate against men. And she was basically all about everybody's rights. And her opinions, her writing is amazing. I've read some of her opinions. I've heard other opinions, listened to them. I cannot tell you what a great writer she is and how well she articulates her positions. And so that's why she was loved. She had friends on the court, right and left center, but she also argued her side very effectively, which gave them the chance to argue their side effectively too and to come up with great decisions. All right, well, we need to play this then and show you a little bit more about this wonderful woman's life. So here we go.
2014, she
voter.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people. And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the second woman to serve as a U.S. Supreme Court Justice who became the leader of the court's liberal wing, died yesterday at the age of 87. Ginsburg was at home with her family. Her death was due to complications from metastatic pancreatic cancer. Outside the Supreme Court, where she served for 27 years, mourners continue to add to an informal memorial that began last night with candles, flowers, and notes to the justice. President Trump heard the news of Ginsburg's death from reporters as he left a campaign rally in Minnesota late yesterday.
You're telling me now for the first time. She led an amazing life. What else can you say? She was an amazing woman. Whether you agreed or not, she was an amazing woman who led an amazing life. I'm actually sad to hear that. I am sad to hear that. Thank you very much.
This morning, the president tweeted to fellow Republicans that selecting a Supreme Court justice is the most important of decisions and, quote, we have this obligation without delay. Democratic presidential nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, called on the Republican-controlled Senate to wait until after the November election to consider a nomination to the court.
You know, tonight and in the coming days, we should focus on the loss of the justice and her enduring legacy. But there is no doubt, let me be clear, that the voters should pick the president, and the president should pick the justice for the Senate to consider.
Today, at both the U.S. Capitol and the White House, flags were lowered to half-staff in Ginsburg's honor. NewsHour's Amna Nawaz has more on the life and career of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Serving on this court is the highest honor, the most awesome trust that can be placed in a judge.
She was born Ruth Joan Bader in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York, to parents of Ukrainian and Austrian descent.
What is the difference between a bookkeeper in New York City's Garment District and a Supreme Court justice? One generation, my own life bears witness.
The young Ruth Bader graduated first in her class from Cornell University in 1954. That same year, she married Martin Ginsburg. He became a lawyer and encouraged her to do the same.
I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner truly extraordinary for his generation, a man who believed at age 18 when we met that a woman's work, whether at home or on the job, is as important as a man's.
Ginsburg was one of just 9 women in her entering class at Harvard Law School. It was 1956. The dean admonished the women for taking spots that could have gone to men. Despite that, she became the first woman to join the prestigious Harvard Law Review, and all the while cared for her young children and her husband, recovering from cancer. Ginsburg ended up transferring to Columbia Law School and graduated first in her class. Many law firms still balked at hiring women, but she landed teaching jobs and eventually became Columbia Law School's first female tenured professor. During the 1970s, she worked with the American Civil Liberties Union, arguing 6 landmark cases on gender equality before the U.S. Supreme Court, and winning 5 of them.
Sex, like race, has been made the basis for unjustified, or at least unproved, assumptions concerning an individual's potential to perform or to contribute to society.
In 1980, President Carter named Ginsburg to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. It was another milestone moment, as she told the NewsHour in 2016.
It would not be a realistic ambition for a woman to want to become a federal judge. It was not realistic until Jimmy Carter became our president. He looked around at the federal judiciary and said, "That's nice, but they all look like me. That's not how the great United States looks."
Ginsburg served on the appeals court for 13 years, until President Clinton nominated her to the Supreme Court. She was overwhelmingly confirmed by the Senate.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do solemnly swear,
And went on to become one of the court's most prolific writers and frequent questioners, as well as the senior member of its liberal bloc. Still, Ginsburg became close friends with an ideological opposite, conservative colleague Antonin Scalia. She eulogized him after his death in 2016.
we once asked how we could be friends given our disagreement on lots of things. Justice Scalia answered, "I attack ideas. I don't attack people. Some very good people have some very bad ideas."
Privately, Ginsburg also faced a number of health complications. In 1999, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. A decade later, she was treated for pancreatic cancer. In 2014, she underwent a heart procedure to have a stent implanted. Then came surgery for lung cancer in 2019. But Ginsburg never slowed down for long, working out with a personal trainer twice a week. And she remained a staunch advocate for women and minorities in the courtroom and beyond.
All right, we'll stop there. A fitting eulogy to her, or remembrance of her, that came out this weekend, and there's been a lot of them. Every station has done a great tribute to her. She's just that important in American history. Well, listen, here's also history. It's been 100 years since women first got the right to vote. and women will decide this election. They're the majority of voters, and they're also, they vote in higher numbers. So this election, it's important, and women will cast the deciding votes. Now I'm going to drop back in history just a little bit and explain to you when our politics became so bad that the courts became political footballs. Before this nomination of Judge Bork in 1987, and remember Reagan picks the first woman, but then he picks this judge too. And I'm sure he meant well. What you should know is Reagan was able to get the votes of evangelical Christians in part because they want to overturn a decision called Roe v. Wade on abortion. And they've gone about it the right way. They've tried to elect people who will then nominate candidates to the court that are more sympathetic to their views. It's an important issue. I in no way want to minimize it today, but we don't have time to go into the details of that case of Roe v. Wade. But that is a voting bloc now that has supported not just Ronald Reagan, but George W. Bush and George Bush, Republican candidates, and President Trump too. One of the tipping points in the last election was when Mr. Trump held up a list of candidates that he was going to propose to the court system, and then Supreme Court, that were more conservative on that issue. And so now you know why the evangelical community tends to support the Republican candidate as part of the base of that party. So it's a noble thing they're doing, and they're doing it the right way within the law by trying to get people appointed that reflect their views. All right, now here's the deal though. That issue is what we call a third rail in American politics. Even talking about it in class, it will cause all sorts of things. I had a debate with students once, way back, so now 6-7 years ago, where we thought, okay, let's pick sides and let's talk about abortion. I had to call it to a halt. I have never seen anything so toxic in class, that the issue itself was so polarizing and so emotional that students literally didn't talk to each other for days afterwards, which is never what we want. We want to hear all sides and we want to share ideas, but this is one issue we'll never debate again because it's so emotional. And I get that. It truly is an emotional thing. Oh well, with that now as context, and without going into any more detail than that, I just want to say that then the President Reagan chooses Bork for this position. And he, like Ginsburg, was on the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. He himself is a great legal mind as well, but he came with a lot of baggage. And I'm going to jump ahead and show you the main part of that baggage. Do you guys remember the story I told you about Nixon and the Saturday Night Massacre, and how we had a special prosecutor named Archibald Cox who heard about the tapes, the tapes in the White House, and wanted them subpoenaed to see if there was evidence about Watergate on it? Well, Nixon freaked out. He did not want those tapes heard. He wanted to block that. So he tried to get Mr. Cox fired. Now, because of certain procedural rules, the president can't directly fire someone. They have to have their boss fire them. And the boss for Cox was the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, who refused. Said, no, this is the right thing, and we need to get those tapes. Well, Richardson refused and resigned in protest. Then the Deputy Attorney General was asked by Nixon to fire this person, and guess what? He didn't do it either. He resigned. Mr. Nixon did reach down then, and the next person in line was the Solicitor General of the United States, the guy that argues cases in the Supreme Court for the U.S. government, and he had him fire Archibald Cox, completing the Saturday Night Massacre, and the judge that did that was Justice Bork. So with that kind of as fresh memories from just a decade earlier, Bork is now being proposed for the Supreme Court. This set off a fight like we've just never heard before, and it gets pretty ugly. But what you have to understand too is that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, which screens all the candidates, and that's true today, there's a Judiciary Committee that screens all the candidates, was Joe Biden, the current nominee for President of the United States. Now, here's the deal. This gets really, really political at this point. Now, here's what happens.
Finally tonight, an obituary. We take a look at the man whose nomination to the Supreme Court in the 1980s dramatically changed that process.
As a nationally known jurist and legal scholar, Robert Bork was a mainstay of conservative jurisprudence for more than half a century.
It is not a cliche to make a distinction between interpreting a document as law and making up new principles that are not in the Constitution.
Those views fueled a titanic struggle over his 1987 nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court, a fight that became a seminal moment in altering the process for all future nominees. Bork had first gained notoriety years earlier as President Nixon's Solicitor General. On Nixon's orders, he carried out the so-called Saturday Night Massacre in October 1973, firing Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, who'd sought access to the White House tapes.
The president said, "It is my expectation that the Department of Justice will continue with full vigor the investigations and prosecutions that had been entrusted to the Watergate Special Prosecution Force."
Robert H. Bork was born in 1927 and graduated from the University of Chicago Law School. His economic libertarianism evolved into law and order conservatism during the upheaval of the 1960s. In 1982, President Reagan named him to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. There, he applied his conviction that the founders' original intent in the Constitution did not include a right to privacy, abortion rights, and some civil rights protections. And then came the fight of his life.
But I today announce my intention to nominate United States Court of Appeals Judge Robert H. Bork.
Bork's Supreme Court confirmation hearings unfolded in September 1987 and heralded a historic struggle over the ideological composition of the federal courts.
The judge's responsibility is to discern how the framers' values, defined in the context of the world they knew, apply in the world we know.
In Robert Bork's America, there is no room at the inn for blacks and no place in the Constitution for women. And in our America, there should be no seat on the Supreme Court for Robert Bork.
Now, who's speaking there? Well, that's Ted Kennedy, the brother of former President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He was a senator of Massachusetts. Who's going to speak next on behalf of Bork was Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, who was on this Judiciary Committee for almost 30 years. At one point, our Senator Utah Hatch had been in the confirmation of every single member of the Supreme Court. And here's Hatch in rebuttal.
It is hard to understand why your nomination would generate controversy. The answer is found in one word, which is tragic in this judicial context, and that word is politics.
But Bork refused to withdraw, and the Senate rejected his nomination 58-42, with 6 Republicans joining all but 2 Democrats in opposition.
Now, of course, this was a time when the whole process was starting to change. And what really kicked this thing off was an ad that a group ran about Bork that just turned this into a political battle like you can't believe. In other words, it becomes like running for president or running for the Senate. And the Supreme Court is not to be political. And I'll prove that to you in a second. But here's the famous ad now that you hear referenced in a lot of these clips. Here we go.
There's a special feeling of awe people get when they visit the Supreme Court of the United States, the ultimate guardian of our rights as Americans. That's why we set the highest standards for our highest court justices, and that's why we're so concerned. This is Gregory Peck. Robert Bork wants to be a Supreme Court justice, but the record shows that he has a strange idea of what justice is. He defended poll taxes and literacy tests, which kept many Americans from voting. He opposed the civil rights law that ended whites-only signs at lunch counters. He doesn't believe the Constitution protects your right to privacy. And he thinks that freedom of speech does not apply to literature and art and music. Robert Bork could have the last word on your rights as citizens. But the Senate has the last word on him. Please urge your senators to vote against the Bork nomination, because if Robert Bork wins a seat on the Supreme Court, it will be for life, his life and yours.
Right. Supreme Court justices are picked for life, and they can have more impact on our lives than a president. Certainly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. She had more impact on our lives and how the rights and freedoms that we have than Bill Clinton. So we see that now this has become a political football and something we now call the culture wars. There's many cultures in America, but there's people dividing up in sides on issues. that divide us, no question about it. All right, well, let's talk about the independence of the court. And before the Bork nomination, putting people on the Supreme Court was routine and non-controversial. They looked at the qualifications from the nominee from the president, and if they met legal qualifications and were good minds when it came to the legal decisions, they were put on the court. It was not a political event. Let me prove it to you that it shouldn't be political, and yet today it is, unfortunately. I'm going to ask you to read Article 3 of the Constitution. It's really short, take you like 3 minutes. It's very vague, though. They didn't have a chance to flesh out the court system and the Constitutional Convention. They just ran out of time. So they basically said, we're going to have one Supreme Court and other inferior courts that the Congress will decide on later. And sure enough, when Congress comes into session for the first time, this is the first Congress led by James Madison and others, they passed this law called the Judiciary Act of 1789. Kind of remember where this is in the lecture. You'll need to know this later on. But this means that the judiciary committees in the House and the Senate set the structure, and they decided how many courts there should be, how many members should be on the Supreme Court. First, they said it was 3. Then they thought, no, we need more than that. So they upped it to 6. This is the Congress doing this. And then even numbers turned out to be bad. So now they've settled on 9, and 9's a traditional number, but that can be changed at any time by the Congress. Congress pays the bills. We pay taxes that funds the court system, so the court system can happen, and pays the salaries of the judges, and they do that in yearly appropriations bills. Okay, now back to the Constitution. It says that in Article 3, justices serve for life, so they're not politically driven. So they don't have to run for office, for example, like senators every 6 years, or presidents every 4, or members of the House every 2. Once they're in for life. So they can make independent decisions from the politics of the day. What if somebody turns a little crazy, which happens? We've had 2 or 3 judges, not many, but that have gone off the deep end and emotionally or whatever. Can they be removed? Yes. The House can impeach and the Senate can remove, and it's happened a couple of times, but it's extremely rare, and I don't believe it's ever happened for the Supreme Court, but just those other courts. Are they paid? Yes. And the unique part about their pay is it can't be reduced by Congress while they're in the job. So if Congress wants to punish a justice for a decision they made, they can't then lower their salary, cut their salary in half. Can't do that. So they know financially they're fine. They're not going to lose their jobs for making the best decisions, and it's meant to create an independent court. And the act that did this again was the Judiciary Act of 1789, a statute to establish the courts of the judicial courts of the United States, signed by President George Washington himself on September 24, 1789. And so this system has been working since the beginning of the country. And you have to understand, the United States becomes a country in 1789 when the Constitution goes into effect. And so that very first year, they got busy writing out what the court system should be, and it's endured that whole time. It was principally authored by this Senator, Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut, who did an amazing job with this. This is the system he established, a 3-tiered system. Most of the court cases, in fact, nearly all of them, from that matter of fact, will start at the district level. It's here where your rights are protected, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendment, due process of law, right to trial by jury if you want it, right to have a lawyer present, right not to incriminate yourself, right to call witnesses, all these things that we're going to talk about with the Bill of Rights, that's fulfilled here. And now today, there's 94 district courts. And there's also bankruptcy courts, and they hear all the cases. They're the ones that convene juries, for example. A few cases then can be appealed to the appellate system. And there's a layer of appeals called the Court of Appeals. There's 13 circuits, they call them, 12 regional courts, and 1 for the federal circuit in DC. Now, if you lose a case, you can't automatically just say, I'm going to appeal, because they'll just turn you down. Very few cases are heard on appeal. For example, if a jury finds you guilty of something, this court and this court, these upper courts, can't overturn a jury verdict. The jury verdict is final. The only thing they can look at is if you had a fair trial, if the process was followed. And so there's very few cases that ever get to appeals, but when they do, they're important. And then once in a while, the Supreme Court will take a case too. Now, the Supreme Court hears quite a few cases, but only hears the cases they want to hear. They don't have to hear any case they don't want to hear. And so when you think, I'm going to appeal to the Supreme Court, no, you're not. your case doesn't warrant that. Very few cases warrant that. Like the cases that Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued, 6 cases in front of the Supreme Court. It's rare that a lawyer ever gets a chance to argue 1 case, much less 6 cases in her case. Now here's a map, the geographical boundaries of the court system. So every state has at least 1 district court. Some states have many more because of population, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in California, right? They're bigger. Washington has 2. Now, this group in yellow, if they have an appeal, it goes to Sacramento, to the 9th Circuit for appeal. Remember, there's 12 of those plus 1 in DC. Utah has a district court system. So does Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Now, Oklahoma has 3 because they have to deal with a lot of Native American issues because of the reservations there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 districts can appeal to Denver, Colorado's 10th Circuit. So if we have an appeal from Utah, it'll go to the 10th Circuit in Denver. All right, so it goes across the country. But now this is kind of how a brief overview of the federal court system. But the federal court system only hears cases of jurisdiction. Now, there's the term right there, jurisdiction. They can only hear a certain number of cases, like laws passed by Congress, treaties, ambassadors from foreign countries, anything to do with the oceans they can weigh in on. The US government, where it's sued by somebody, or a state sues another state, or a state of another citizen is allowed to sue a state. So there's kind of a limited what we call jurisdiction. Where do they not have jurisdiction? Let me give you an example. If you speed through Springville, you don't go to federal court. That has nothing to do with the federal government or federal law. It's a city ordinance that you've broken, and you'll go to a city court and pay your fine. If you commit robbery or murder or any crime like that, that's a state crime, and you will go to a state court. And the state of Utah kind of parallels the federal system. We have district level, appeals level, and a Supreme Court for the state of Utah, but it only hears cases of jurisdiction for Utah. So once again, you rob a bank or you rob a convenience store, you're not going to federal court, you're going to go to state court. Now, a certain number of cases, the federal government has jurisdiction for, the ones I just gave you examples of. Well, here's the current court right now, but now short 1 member. So that means now there's 8 members, right? And this is not a good situation for a court, because if a case comes up, they need to decide, they can break into 4-4 and it's a tie and it doesn't count. So yes, we do need to fill this seat, but how soon? And there's kind of an important rule in this system that's basically, we're in the middle of an election year, and it's really heated, the debate already, that we shouldn't let that debate decide our justices. And basically, let's look at this. This is important to know. While the House has a big responsibility in help establishing what the court system looks like and paying the bills, only the Senate gets to vote on nominees to the court. The person that controls the Senate is named Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell has made it his life's work to make sure conservative judges get on the court. And he's well within his rights and power to do that. But here's the deal, right? He also issued a thing last time, 2016, when this happened, when a vacancy came open on the Supreme Court when Barack Obama was president, 10 months before an election, that we're not going to even have a hearing on this candidate until the election's over. He followed through on that. And he also quoted Joe Biden, who basically said the same thing. We shouldn't be picking new people for the Supreme Court during an election year. Well, it looks like Mitch McConnell is going to not follow his own rule, that he's going to push through a Trump-appointed nominee as soon as possible, instead of waiting for the next president, whoever that is. Now, of course, Mr. Trump wins the election, then fine, go ahead. But what if he loses? They're going to push through a nominee anyway, or at least so he's been saying in the last 24 hours. Now, here's the deal. Our history tells us that we don't push candidates through this close to an election. For example, Abraham Lincoln, he was facing re-election. He was within a few months of being voted on, and this justice died. And he's an infamous judge in American history. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, named Taney from Virginia, who was pro-slavery, and he decided the infamous case of this person here who fought for his freedom because he was living in a free state. And it's called the Dred Scott decision, which is widely considered the worst decision ever made by the Supreme Court, and in many ways triggered the American Civil War. Events that happened from that decision onward were like dominoes that brought the country to war. But even with Taney passing, Lincoln refused to put forth a nominee until after the election to make it not political. So the courts and the Senate are really tied together. And do we follow the Biden rule, the McConnell rule, the Lincoln rule? And I'll go back here, sorry, that we let an election happen first, then let the people pick the president, knowing that there's a vacancy on the court. And this could energize, for example, the Trump base to show up to make sure that they get their nominee, but it could also motivate the other side, knowing this is, but let the American people decide who the president is, who should pick the next president, and next member of the court. Now, for me, I find this entire thing extremely distressing, because the truth of the matter is, we should be, instead of talking about the politics of it, and I'm going to go back to this slide here, we should be talking about the great life of this person. We should maybe have a funeral first. We should maybe have enough respect that we don't turn this into a political scene while we're mourning someone's passing, whether it be a conservative judge or a liberal judge or a moderate judge, it shouldn't matter. This great life needs to be honored and respected first. And yet here we find ourselves that there will be a nominee by Friday before the funeral is even held. Politics should not influence the court. We should wait till the politics are done for a time. But since the Bork nomination, that's just impossible. So here we find a person, the Notorious RBG, who became a literally a cultural icon, because not just because of her great legal mind, but also because she was such a nice person. All the members of the court, when they weighed in, I think I've got that picture next. Here we go. No, it's not next, but here it is. Every single member of the court that issued a press release about her passing, it was so personal. She was a personal friend to each of them, to the right, to the left, to the center, it didn't matter. They fought ideas. They didn't attack each other. And yet we have a politics now that all we do is attack each other, attack from both sides. And it just gets so awful sometimes that you just sit there and wonder what's going on, right? I mean, this is going to be the ugliest election in American history, probably since 1859. And why? The last election between Mr. Obama and Mr. Romney, that election was about ideas. It was about issues. It was about the direction of the country, but it wasn't personal. John McCain, Obama, you go back to Bush, Gore, you go back to Clinton, H.W. Bush, you go back to Reagan and Carter. It wasn't about the person. It was about ideas, and it wasn't personal. And we should at least allow the country a time to mourn this great person before we turn it into a political football. So that's probably the most serious lecture you'll get from me from the year, but I really believe it. We are living in historic times. You can't change that. You have to look at these times, face them, and decide what you want to do and what you believe in, what you think is important. But I urge you to at least think about this. Maybe there's times when we shouldn't be political for a time, and maybe just kick back and appreciate great people, regardless of their political persuasion, whether they're on the left or the right or the center. All right, well, that's really all I have for you today, and I hope that this time passes and we get to better times soon, and we will. There's no question of that.